Hello and welcome to Let Your Heart Be Glad. My name is Megan Besendorfer. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me. I wanted to have this be a little tribute to the prophets who have done so much for me in my life and in helping to raise me spiritually throughout the years. So I wanted to reflect on them. First was President Hinckley. When I was a little girl, President Hinckley was the prophet of my childhood. I remember him waving his cane at General Conference, and I remember him making me feel safe and that he was so tender and so good. And then I remember the night that my mom came in to tell me that President Hinckley had passed away. I remember feeling so sad and confused and thinking, what happens when a prophet dies? It was my first time experiencing that. And I remember her explaining to me that the succession and how it works. And I had this warm feeling in my heart that I still remember today, that President Hinckley was with his wife, Marjorie, and that he was happy there to be with her, to be reunited with her. And I remember feeling so much peace overcome me. And then next was President Monson, and I loved President Monson. He was the prophet of my teenage years and my young adulthood. I remember his stories and how he always would talk so much about sharing the gospel and coming to the rescue. And something that I really attributed to President Monson was my determination to serve a mission, and something I always grew up with. I always knew I wanted to serve, but when President Monson changed the age where women could go, young girls could go at 19, I remember feeling like my entire life had just shifted and been put into fast forward. So when I went on my mission at 19, that was something so special for me because I remember where I was sitting and who I was with when he announced that age change, and just the joy that filled us and how we just cried together and rejoiced immediately, recognizing just how many doors that was opening for young people. So that was a special moment for me. I was 22 when President Monson passed away. And at that point in my life, I had had a miscarriage and I had been married for 2 years. And it was a really difficult time. And I remember looking back on his teachings and feeling a lot of peace, even though it wasn't clearly spoken of in conference or in the scriptures of what would happen to a child that had been miscarried, to an infant that had been miscarried, but that I knew that my family was eternal and I knew that Jesus would make everything right in the end. And then came President Nelson. And I remember when President Nelson became prophet, I didn't really know who he was. I hadn't paid much attention, and I don't think he had spoken very often in General Conference up until that point. But President Nelson has been a beacon for me. He became someone that I knew I could trust to point me to Christ. And that was the most special thing about him for me, is that it seemed like no matter what was going on in the world, no matter what was going on in my life, that he always pointed me to Christ. And I knew that if I listened to him and if I actually relied on Jesus Christ, that I could make it through anything. And that has been a cornerstone of my testimony. I've needed that testimony because things that have come up in recent years and even in recent months have really tested my faith and tested my resolve. And it's interesting because it was President Nelson's talk where he invited us to take part in the gathering of Israel that prompted me to create this podcast. And I had no idea what I was doing. I still don't really know what I'm doing. But what I did know is that I felt like I could talk. I can talk a lot. I can talk all day. So maybe something worth talking about is the restored gospel of Jesus Christ and is the doctrine of Jesus Christ. And so I remember sitting in the temple and praying to know what I could do to help in the gathering of Israel. And first and foremost, I felt that I can teach the gospel to my children and that I can teach them to love the Lord and help them understand who they are and that the Lord loves them. But then second was that I could create a podcast where my voice could be heard and that hopefully, like President Nelson, I can point all of the listeners that come to Christ, because this isn't about me. This is about him. And this is about what he has to offer us as our Savior and Redeemer. That is my motivating factor for having this podcast and for swallowing a lot of fears in order to put this content out there. But I want more than anything for us all to come to know Christ, to choose to love him and to let him love us. And so when I think of President Nelson, I think the thing I'll remember most is just how I felt so inspired and emboldened to be able to testify of Jesus Christ. And now we get to look forward to President Oaks. And I am so excited to see what happens in the coming days with President Oaks as the prophet. I think that this is going to be a very interesting time. With President Nelson, we were at a breakneck speed. And so I wonder what will happen with President Oaks. I wonder if he'll keep up that momentum. I wonder if the focus will shift a little bit. But one thing that I do know is that, like President Nelson, President Oaks will point us to Christ. I love the prophets of the Lord. Their words have inspired me and shaped me, and they've been the answers to my questions, and they've provided clarity in moments of uncertainty. And I testify that God does speak to his prophets. I know he does. I can see it in their countenance. I was studying recently about what it means to take upon us the countenance of Christ and why that's so important. And I think about the way that God looks at Christ. What does he feel when he beholds his son? And just how important it is for us to take upon his countenance so that God can look upon us the same way. To know that, like Jesus, we are choosing to be a disciple of God the Father, that we're choosing to follow him and we're choosing his plan. Jesus said that everything that he does was to point us to the Father. And so I hope that as I strive to be like Jesus, that I can have a relationship like the one Jesus Christ has with God the Father. And that's why having living prophets is so important, because they really do help us understand Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father. They help us understand their character, they help us understand their nature, and they help us know who we are in relation to them and why they want to bless us in the first place. So, something else that I've been thinking about, actually, something that I really was thinking about was how Sister Oaks must be feeling right now. She just is about to become the wife to the prophet of the Lord, and I can't even imagine what that's going to be like for her. Another thing I've been thinking about is that as the brethren move to fill the vacancy in the quorum of the 12, that his family, whoever this gentleman is going to have a lot of growing pains in the days to come, and that it's going to be a time of an adventure and a whirlwind for them. And I know that the Lord has prepared whoever is about to be called as the new apostle. I do trust that. And I'm excited to see who it is. I'm excited to sustain them. I'm so grateful for the men and women who serve in these big and very public capacities for the Lord. So many of them give up countless hours and do so many things that we are unaware of, that they touch so many lives, they do so much good and take on so many assignments, and they dedicate their life to Christ. And they do that for you, and they do it for me, and they do it for the Lord. And I really am grateful. I'm grateful because it is through their efforts and ours that we are able to prepare the world for the second coming of Jesus Christ. I wanted to share really quickly a quote from President Nelson. He said, "We do not know the day or the hour of his coming, but I do know that the Lord is prompting me to urge us to get ready for that great and dreadful day. I pray that we heed this counsel, and I pray that we prepare." I remember when he said this, feeling blown away, that he's telling us that the Lord is prompting him as the prophet to tell us to get ready. It may seem like a centuries-old declaration, but it's more true with every passing day, that we have to prepare and that he is coming sooner and sooner and sooner with every day. And I hope that we can feel the momentum that is backing this spiritual declaration from the Lord to tell his prophet, to tell his people to get ready. I can feel it. And I trust that you can feel it too, this spiritual momentum. If we think of the recent events that have taken place, they're heartbreaking, and they have stirred our hearts to turn to the Lord. And I hope that we will not waste this moment. I hope that we'll take part in the momentum that the Lord has set forth, and that we will commit to prioritizing our discipleship like President Nelson has urged us to do. I hope that we will gather Israel in any way that we can, and that we will prepare our hearts and our minds for the Lord's return. How we will miss President Nelson. I thank him for setting the example of how to approach the throne of God with confidence. That's what he did. I'm sure of it. And I was thinking of, with 101 years on earth, I can only imagine what that family reunion is like on the other side of the veil right now. I am so grateful for living prophets. I am so grateful to know that God has restored his church and has returned to this pattern of having a mouthpiece here on earth to guide us, to guide his covenant people. It's easy to forget that the prophet is not just the prophet of the church, but the prophet of the whole world. As the prophet and the quorum of the 12 and our other leaders, as they strive to teach us and bring us closer to Christ, I pray and invite you to trust them and to ask God if they really are called of him, if they really are his chosen people to lead us right now, the chosen leaders. I think of all of the sisters who are called to be in presidencies and the brethren that are called to be in the 70, and I am just amazed at what must have gone on in their life to prepare them for those callings, and to know that the Lord, he trained them up. He was able to see their potential for them to be saved for such a time as this, and he then invites us to sustain them, to really give our all in doing what we can to support their message, because their message is Christ's message.